Perfect. Thank you, Claire. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Frist Center's How Do We Empower and Support Autistic Talent in the Workplace? This is event 2 of our 6-event webinar series for Autistic Pride Month this April. My name is Ellie Del Guercio, and I am one of the 2 communications and advocacy interns at the Vanderbilt Frist Center for Autism and Innovation this semester. And I'm a junior at Vanderbilt University, majoring in human and organizational development, also known as HOD. And part of my major requires a semester-long internship where we apply the major's core competencies to an organization. And overall, this internship opportunity culminates in my undergraduate experience. And I also feel that it is important to share that I'm a neurotypical, and I've spent the semester learning about autism and how to advocate for neurodiversity. So neurodiversity is the idea that neurological differences such as autism, ADHD, dyslexia, and Tourette syndrome are seen as diversity of mind rather than disabilities. And neurodivergent adults bring needed talent to the workplace through neurodiverse thinking and innovation. I wanted to start out by talking about language and the topic of autism. When talking about autism, people either use person-first or identity-first language. Person-first language is when you would say person with autism instead of autistic in an effort to empathize with an individual, that is not defined entirely by their diagnosis. Identity-first language is when many autism self-advocates prefer to use, like my supervisor, Claire. And this is when you intentionally use the word autistic in an effort to affirm that being on the spectrum is a positive part of one's identity. And so what language should we use when we're talking about autism? If you're on the spectrum, that is entirely your choice to make. If you aren't on the spectrum, you should ask people what they prefer you refer to them as. And when you aren't interacting with anyone who is autistic, you should default to using identity-first language by using the word autistic, but still use both types of language interchangeably. So the Frist Center is one of the only university research centers in the US that focuses on autistic and neurodiversity employment. The Frist Center focuses on engineering technologies and transforming the workplace with neurodiverse talent. EY and the Frist Center are employee assessment and referral partners as EY launched their Neurodiversity Center of Excellence that today has expanded globally. Autistic and neurodivergent adults face many barriers in the workplace, from hiring to employment and retention. For example, 51% of people with autism in the US say that their skills were higher than those the job required. Yet, EY has found neurodivergent talent to be a crucial part of their community. The progress and growth of the Frist Center and EY's autistic and neurodiversity employment initiatives will be the focus of our conversation today. Our webinar today will give you an overview of the existing research on neurodiversity in the workplace and an insight into the implementation of Ernst Young's Neurodiverse Centers of Excellence. Today, we are here with Hiren Shukla, Director of EY's Global and America's Diverse Center of Excellence, Emily Edwards, Manager of EY's Nashville Neurodiverse Center of Excellence, and Bradley Simpkins, Neurodiverse Center of Excellence employee at EY Nashville. We also have Frist Deputy Director Tim Vogus and Communications Coordinator Claire Barnett joining us in our conversation today. So first, we will have Tim Vogus starting off the conversation with what research and best practices exist around neurodiversity at work.
And Tim, you should be able to share your slides now.
Yep, I'm gonna do that right this moment. Thank you all for joining us for a little lunchtime conversation. And today's a very special day in the Vogus household. Our favorite autistic person, Aiden Vogus, is celebrating his 19th birthday today. So he is not joining us right now. He's out partying and doing whatever it is he's doing. But I'm gonna talk a little bit about autism at work and organizational research. So kind of what do we know and how do we think about these things? It's gonna start on a little bit of a downbeat, but then we're gonna pivot and bring it around to something positive. So that the downbeat it starts with is employment, we know, for autistic individuals is a challenge. So autistic adults have high unemployment rates. Underemployment, meaning where people have jobs that are less than the skills they actually bring to the workforce, is also common. And we also know that not just acquiring a job in the first place, but retaining a job over time can be a challenge. So 50% of people, autistic people, experience instability 2 to 3 years after high school when they were in employment kind of settings. And that's some work done by Julie Taylor, who's also an affiliate of our center and is a spectacular autism researcher at Vanderbilt. So why is employment difficult, both obtaining a job and continuing a job over time? So it's partly difficult because autistic people often believe that the workplace is challenging because of autism. So what are some of those challenges that are faced? So maybe not understanding and following the expected social behaviors, maybe some things related to time management or change. Maybe it's specific job-related tasks, especially ones that are interruption-oriented, like managing stress and stressful dynamics in the workplace. But what I want to pivot us to a little bit is employers' lack of understanding of what's precisely needed to have a supportive, inclusive workplace. And one of the biggest barriers, I think, is what we talk about as organizational culture. So what do I mean by organizational culture? What I mean is a system of shared values that define what is important. So it's what we think about our organization and what we think is important within it, and the norms that define appropriate attitudes and behaviors for organizational members. So how are employees supposed to feel, act, and think while they're at work? So it's some of these taken for granted assumptions about how we do our work, the appropriate way of doing things in the workplace. And organizational culture also defines the ideal employee, so what it means to be a good and effective worker in that workplace. And oftentimes, like I said, this is a taken for granted assumption, so it probably is more likely to start with neurotypical assumptions about what is effective workplace performance, what a job actually requires. And it's not necessarily tightly connected to the actual work itself. So how do we overcome some of these organizational cultural barriers, some of those taken for granted assumptions that might have a neurotypical person in mind as the kind of ideal employee? Well, there are several things that research has identified that organizations and their leaders can do. So one of the things is start to rethink what culture is all about. Many times hear employers talking about hiring for cultural fit. What does cultural fit mean? It means that you behave, act, and think like everybody else who's already in the organization. Well, that can be fundamentally limiting, especially if the overwhelming majority of the workforce is neurotypical, right? So you're going to pick people who think, act, behave, in similar kinds of ways. So I would like to encourage us, and research would suggest there is value in thinking about cultural contribution rather than cultural fit, not replicating what you already have and getting people who are exactly like everyone else who's in the workforce, but actually thinking about cultural contribution. What are the unique skills and talents that somebody can bring to the workforce? And it's about thinking about who we are as a culture, and what does every person add to it, rather than how does everybody conform to it. We can also rethink interviewing, because interviewing is a big barrier because of the social demands, the anxiety that is produced as a part of the interviewing process. So what can we do to start to rethink? Where does research point us? And everything that I'm talking about, I think, I'm fairly certain will be mirrored by very specific examples from our friends at EY who put a lot of this research into practice. So it's about, so when we talk about rethinking interviewing, we're talking about asking questions that are concrete and specific, avoiding hypotheticals or kind of goofy interview questions like, if you were a tree, what kind of tree would you be, right? Like, and things that are not specifically related to demonstration of skills, fitting for the actual job. And also one thing that's a reminder is sometimes the question will not explicitly say that the person needs to elaborate a longer example or story or something like that. So how can you rethink interviewing to be more inclusive of neurodiversity, more inclusive of autistic talent? Well, if somebody's not answering a question as completely as you might like, prompting for more detail, kind of asking follow-up questions to help guide somebody through the process, so you actually are getting a window into how someone thinks through the interview. Another thing that can be helpful is providing interview questions beforehand. It's not clear to me why it evolved over time that interviews were supposed to be gotcha kinds of situations that surprise people. But if we really want to assess what are people's skills, knowledge, and capabilities, well, we want them to answer the questions that we think are important, right? Like, we demonstrate those in the best way that they can. So providing interviews and questions beforehand can help with that because it lessens some of the anxiety. People know what's coming. And it also allows them to prepare and think through, how would I answer this question thoroughly so I can really demonstrate what I know. And as part of this kind of, making the interview process a little bit less aversive and a little less emotionally taxing, allowing for processing and sensory breaks during the course of an interview, minimizing external interruptions, knocks on the door, phone calls, things like that might occur during the interview. And also think about whether you need an interview in the first place, whether that is the best way to assess whether somebody has the job relevant skills and capabilities to do the work. Consider alternatives. Are there work-related tasks that somebody could engage in the office as part of an interview type process versus just the traditional interview of, I ask you a question and you respond? Or can somebody provide examples of their prior work that might also indicate a level of skill? So rethinking this in some of these specific ways can be helpful. Rethinking how people are brought on board the organization. So once people are hired, how do we onboard people? And so one thing that started to become a little bit more popular and in a number of different organizations is what's called a human user manual. So we all have user manuals for technologies we use and things like that. But how about rethinking user manuals for how we should interact together at work? So you know what I'm about, I know what you're about, so we can work together more effectively. And it also makes the conversation about diversity and diverse styles legitimate and gives some structure. So a personal user manual might be somebody just writing up a one-page document, bullet points like what I have here. What's my style? What do I value about the work I do? What's the best way to communicate with me? How can you help me if I seem to be struggling? What don't I don't have patience for, and what people might misunderstand about or misinterpret about. So just kind of laying those things out so people get to know each other in a little bit fuller way. So they also have some guidance and some structure about how they can interact. We can also rethink communication and feedback more broadly. So what are some things that we know are helpful? So being clear about expectations and expected outcomes, keeping interactions focused, avoiding ambiguous language, idioms, and complex analogies and things like that, using visual cues when possible, giving frequent, direct, and actionable feedback, and encouraging questions to make sure the person who's on the receiving end of the feedback understands it. Giving people time to process information. So making a statement, being patient, waiting for the other person to respond to it. And then checking in for understanding, just to make sure you understand what the other person said, and they understand what you're saying. So just basics around making communication more structured, more explicit, more clear. And then we can also rethink some elements of workplace design. I have a pretty elaborate photo of something that is a radical rethinking of workplace design, but we know there are some things that might be challenging about the typical workplace environment for autistic individuals around lighting, noise, smells, and the kind of clothing that might be required, especially in a situation where people are required to wear uniforms. But we also know that small accommodations that aren't necessarily very expensive can matter and help. So using different kinds of bulbs that aren't humming or have a problematic light to them, enabling the use and even providing noise canceling headphones, maybe changing someone's work location if they're in an especially busy, chaotic, or smelly, or any other kind of problematic kind of setting. Building in kind of sensory breaks and objects or sensory rooms, even kind of, somebody's required to wear a uniform, having uniform modifications. Somebody is kind of sensitive to the feel of different kind of clothing and textures. And also rethinking more fundamentally, as I think we've all been doing over the course of the past year, what of the traditional office is even really needed? What are the essential elements? Are there things people can do at home where they might be in a more comfortable environment and people can collaborate through technology or other means? So what is the traditional office needed for? and how can that be structured to make sure it's effective. And the last thing I think we can think about is rethinking leadership in organizations. So we know, as Ellie started us off with some really good description and really good use of thinking about language in a careful way, we know that what leaders convey in their language and how they talk about neurodiversity and how they endorse and embrace it. I think you'll hear from Hiren and Emily some really strong embracing of the importance of neurodiversity in organizations and the profound impact it's made for UI. So leaders doing this matters for both neurotypical peers, autistic employees, other managers in the organization, to kind of say neurodiversity is something we are and something we do. It's a valuable element of who we are as an organization. And also specific things leaders can do. So those things I mentioned earlier around communication and feedback, we have research evidence that specific actions taken by leaders to structure the work better helps. So consistent scheduling and responsibilities, organizers to help kind of structure the job and the work, reducing unstructured time, being direct and clear with communications, reminders, reassurances, kind of ongoing coaching and feedback. And we also know that the leadership that I just described there is not the kind of glamorous leadership that you'll see in leading business magazines, Business Week or Fortune or these other kind of locations, because that tends to emphasize this more charismatic and transformational kind of leadership. But what we know from the existing research on that kind of leadership is that it can actually generate more anxiety when the employees are autistic or have ADHD or other forms of neurodiversity in the workplace. So we need to rethink our leadership and focus more on those things that can support employees in this kind of structured way. So that's all I have by way of formal presentation. And I'll turn it over to, I think, Hiren is next.
Yeah,
yes.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Ellie.
I was just going to say thank you so much, Tim. And now we will have Hiren talk about kind of their decision to invest in neurodivergent talent. So thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Ellie. And thank you, Tim and Claire, for inviting us and allowing Emily and Bradley and I to speak today. So my name is Hiren Shukla. I'm based in Dallas. I'm getting over a bit of a chest cold, so I'm sorry that my voice sounds like this. But I lead EY's Global Neurodiverse Center of Excellence model. And I'm interested to tell you today, why did we start this? What is the impetus, the motivation? And I'm hoping that it will give you all, wherever you may be, employer, a candidate, an individual who is neurodivergent, an ally, and as an employer and an ally myself, neurodiversity was something very new to me 6 years ago. But I was taking on a role at EY to drive innovation. That was the topic. And it was very interesting that thought this is an extremely vague word, innovation. What does it mean? How do you create it? Where do you get more of it from? And we started thinking about creativity and the ability to challenge status quo, to look at problems and opportunities from a different perspective, and to be able to reimagine the future. And we realized that you can create an innovative product or an innovative process, but to create an innovation engine, you need to have a multi-dimensional team over a long period of time that is able to feel psychologically safe and to say, I'm going to show up with my best ideas. And what intrigued me, and Tim said a lot of the pieces that he's codified, that we've found out in practice that multidimensional diverse teams are only innovative if you equip them to be, if you allow them to be, if you make them feel safe. And it all starts from the interview and recruiting process. It actually starts even before that with our brand and who we are. And we realize as today, and if I was looking for a job, I would Google a company and say, hey, I wonder what people are saying about them. And so we didn't want to be neurodiverse friendly only on paper. We had to make sure that our processes, our language, and Ellie, I so appreciate the use of your language at the beginning, because there's lots of confusion when you use the term neurodiversity. And if I'm honest, we realized that EY, which is a professional services firm of 300,000 individuals in 150 countries around the world, in 700 cities, we already have neurodivergent individuals at EY. What are we doing to make them feel safe and comfortable, and making sure they are the most productive, successful, and happy, content employees that they can be? And so our why at EY, why did we launch our Neurodiverse Centers of Excellence, was around a business need. We had to create an agile, resilient, multidimensional, diverse workforce that is focused on solving complex problems for EY's clients, building unique innovation product and solution through the use of data and technology. And I'm going to pause because I want you all to know something. This is not a charitable initiative at EY. This is not about corporate social responsibility. It is not a diversity and inclusion program. We don't want to check the box to say, gender, race, sexual orientation. Yes, now we recognize neurodivergent individuals as well. We want to have a scalable, sustainable talent innovation model. And so I'm really happy to stand here in front of you virtually to tell you that EY today, over a 5-year period, has built this program that we are deploying globally. We have 150 team members that have come into EY through our Neurodiverse Center of Excellence. We have team members in 6 cities in the US, Philadelphia, Dallas, Boston, San Jose, California, Nashville, which obviously would be remiss to leave out, and Boston, which is our latest launch in January of this year. And we've launched in India and in Canada at the end of 2020. And by the way, we've hired 60 individuals during the course of the pandemic. And I think what we are learning and finding is the neurodivergent workforce is extremely resilient. They've had to figure out hacks and ways their whole life, which means they're very creative. And those individuals that enjoy complex problem solving through the use of data and technology are filling a really important business need at EY. And that business need is applied through the use of artificial intelligence, intelligent automation, blockchain, cybersecurity, cloud implementation, data sciences, or really just looking at problems and opportunities differently so that EY can bring value to all of our clients. In the next 3, 6, 9, and 12 months, EY will be launching and expanding our program in Poland, Spain, Costa Rica, United Kingdom, Ireland, Latin America, Asia Pacific, and aggressively all across the US. And this is why we are so proud to partner with the Frist Center and folks like Tim, Kayvon, and others, because really for EY, as employers, we only know what we know. We need to make sure we're getting a full perspective, including the academic perspective and including the neurodivergent perspective. And so for us at EY, this journey of learning, as Tim has said, really started with, why do we want to do this? B, what processes like interviewing are we willing to change? And I will tell you, one of the greatest successes we've had was moving away from a behavioral-based interview, asking questions like Tim said, if you're a grasshopper, what would you do? Which we realized made no sense at all. to more of a performance-based interview. If you enjoy problem solving, we'd like to give you some problems. If you have a natural acumen and aptitude towards the use of data and technology, can we try some of this? Can we work with you? And we are not expecting any of our team members. In fact, as Emily will tell you, a number of our team members came to EY with zero work experience, zero technical skill. We're interested in your ability to learn and apply. And that is the key difference, where we have 92% retention of our workforce, which is best in class if you think about the data science and artificial intelligence skills and competencies that not only our EY is going after, but so, by the way, is every other organization in the world. And so for us, we see this as, we see our neurodivergent teams as part of our larger multidimensional diverse teamings, where gender, age, sexual orientation, socioeconomic groups, when we put all of that together and we orchestrate it, and this is the key part that I think is been a great learning for us. And Tim touched upon this. He mentioned the leadership side. We realize that leadership often looks like on TV and in the movies as is somebody who knows exactly what they want to do, and then they tell everybody else what to do, and everybody goes off and does their part. We realize that leadership is actually being the conductor of a symphony, of an orchestra. You have to help lead the way. You have to give cues and signals. But at the end of the day, the beautiful music actually comes out when each of the individual players and their instruments do what they do best. And so we have learned a lot from a leadership perspective, how to listen more, how to create the conditions around psychological safety so that team members are comfortable voicing their thoughts and concerns regardless of rank. And that's something that's really critical. Corporate America often is very hierarchical, which means that if I'm the new staff person who started, I may not tell the boss that I think something is wrong. What we love about our neurodivergent team members is they will tell us when we're wrong, and that's what we want to hear. And so, in effect, what we thought is a good component to our innovation journey, being the neurodivergent team members, we did not realize that the neurodivergent team members would make us better leaders and managers. We would have to mean what we say and say what we mean. And frankly, it would help us in thinking through how you are better orchestrators of all of your team members. And so everything from performance management and interviewing, how we onboard and deploy, all of those learnings that we're getting from our Center of Excellence program is now being disseminated across all of EY. It's going to allow us as an organization to be much more agile. And frankly, I am extremely proud of the fact that not only has EY's leadership seen this, but I will tell you wholeheartedly, our clients have seen it. Engaging with government agencies and governments around this has been really powerful. And also engaging with nonprofits and others, and who say, you do hard work in this space, how can we work together? And then last but not least, engaging with academia. And this is something Tim and Kayvon and I have spoken about, is it's not enough for EY and the Frist Center to do what we do alone. It's really important that we tell others what to do, and we show them how to do it, and we join them in that journey, and we allow them to join us. So really proud to be here today. Thank you for the time. Without further ado, Emily, I will hand off to you.
Of course, Ellie, and you make sure I'm on track here, Ellie. I know that you wanted Bradley and I to kind of talk about the manager and employee experience. Is that appropriate to go to next?
Yes, of course. Thank you so much.
Of course. So Hi, everyone. My name is Emily Edwards, and I actually live and work in Nashville, Tennessee. And I am a part of the Neurodiversity Center of Excellence. I am the manager for our 14 awesome individuals that we have here in Nashville. And I actually have one of my team members here with me as well, and I will give him a chance to introduce himself in just a second. But I wanted to share my experience as the manager here at EY. Hiren mentioned this a little bit, but the easiest way I can summarize my role is to provide psychological safety to my team members. That's my number one priority. And truly, my goal in a lot of what we do. But my day-to-day looks like helping our neurodivergent individuals manage a variety of executive functioning and coping skills throughout what they would need to be successful in the workplace and on projects. So that can look like helping them to manage their time, how to prioritize their work, how to manage their stress if their work is maybe too stressful. What does that look like? And also providing and helping them with any support or accommodations they might need. As Hiren mentioned, our team members are hyper-focused in the technology space. And so I do work alongside of them on their technology projects. And Bradley's going to kind of share what technologies he looks at if anyone is interested on this call to kind of understand what skills he is applying. So I will let him address that. But my main goal as the manager is to help them be successful in the workplace. So Bradley, why don't I let you kind of talk about what your interactions with me are like, and then maybe you could talk about some of the technologies that you use here at EY.
Of course. Hey, everybody. My name is Bradley. I live and work in Nashville as well. I am one of the employees in the
Bradley, you're a little bit faint. I don't know if you can get closer to your mic or speak up, but that might help a little.
I can try to.
Oh, that's better. That is better.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Awesome. Well, hey, everybody. My name is Bradley. I am with the Nashville NCoE. I've lived here my entire life. Love it here. So as far as my interactions with Emily and kind of the way that Emily will support me will kind of look a little bit different for each individual based on what they need. But for me personally, Emily will help facilitate a lot with time, especially whenever my workload gets extremely heavy, and also a lot with communication, asking things like asking clarification, clarifying questions, things like that, whenever I don't necessarily fully understand, I guess, what a project would be asking for. And then something else that Emily has been very supportive in is trying to help further my career in whatever ways I can. So trying to make sure that the projects that I get aligned to are relevant towards skills that I want to build and grow on. Emily will help a lot with that as well, especially since I plan on returning to college soon for web development. So one of the projects that I'll be focused on soon will be focused into that. So that way I can continue to study that. And then as far as the different types of projects that we do as NCoE members, they're all technology focused, and we focus a lot on things like data analytics and automation. And as Hiren mentioned, we use all sorts of different tools to achieve our objectives. So I've used personally Alteryx, Power BI. I've programmed in C# and VBA. The project that I'm going to will be HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So we all use different tools, and we're all good at different things. That way we can get whatever we need done.
That's perfect, Bradley. Thank you so much. Ellie and Claire, are there any follow-up things that you would want to hear from Bradley or I about the experience at EY?
What I would love for you to touch on before we shift to our last little piece of information in the Q&A is, how do you work with other people in the NCoE, Bradley? Are you on collaborative teams with other neurodivergent members, or are you mostly working on independent projects?
So it's kind of a mix between the two, actually. So there will be times where we'll work on projects that'll have a bunch of team members. We could have 7, 8, 9 team members on one project. And there will also be times where the project is a smaller project and it only requires one of us. So it kind of depends on project requirements and when the stakeholder would like to receive the final product by.
I love that you get to do both. Ellie, do you have any other questions for Bradley or Emily, or should I shift to my final bit of information for the webinar?
I do not, so feel free to shift and then we can open up the Q&A. I'm sure people definitely have questions for Emily and Bradley, so thank you.
Yes. I'm very excited. Okay, so the last little piece that we want to make sure you guys have information-wise is, oh, there we go. What other companies are doing this? Because whether you are you work at a business that's considering being more intentional about including autistic people in your workplace and neurodivergent people more broadly. Maybe you're an autistic person who's looking for opportunities out there. I want to let you know what other companies have made this a priority. And I'm a little biased because the Frist Center is partners with EY. I don't think any of them do it better than EY. But they're slowly catching up and they're using the same best practices. And honestly, a lot of them are using the models that EY have set, because EY has been great about saying this is not about us sort of hiding this secret talent. It's about us sharing the way that you can use it too, which is fantastic. Anyway, these are other companies, and it's not an exhaustive list of every company in the whole world that has made any kind of disability hiring a priority. These are companies that have a track record of recruiting and supporting autistic employees. And it may be through an Autism at Work program, it may be neurodiversity at work, it may be disability at work, but no matter what their program is, we know that autistic employees who go into these companies are supported in the unique way that they need to be. And as someone who's autistic myself, I look at this list and I think, okay, whenever I make my next career move, like which one of these do I want to be at? Because these are places I know prioritize what I bring. And so if anybody out there's like me, this might be a helpful list. And I want to point out, so you see companies like Walgreens and CVS on there, which it's really interesting. Walgreens was one of the very first companies in the US to really place value on its disabled employees and to recruit them and to say, we need you, we're going to pay you a fair wage. We could have a whole nother webinar about the history of employment and wages for disabled people, but I won't go down that rabbit hole. So Walgreens and CVS are there, Home Depot and Lowe's. But aside from that, there's something I want to point out here. And it's that a lot of these, so if they're underlined and in bold on this slide, they are either data or tech focused. They are taking advantage of the talents a lot of autistic people have for recognizing patterns and little details and really hyper focusing on, tech or data analysis related projects. So on the one hand, I want to point out that this is amazing that these companies have recognized that those talents are essential to promoting the growth of their business. On the other hand, I want to point out that this is over half of the companies on the list. So if you happen to have a connection to a company that could use someone who's good at visual thinking, data analysis details, but it's not a tech company, have a conversation about how they could be using neurodivergent talent as well, because too often we see autistic people who are not tech oriented, but who have talents that still fall into that realm of the things autistic people are good at, and have more trouble finding programs that are supportive of the things that they need. So and this comment that Ben makes in the chat about the misconception that autistics are mainly savants in STEM, we want to combat that. Savantism in general is a separate condition, and most autistic people do not have it. A lot of autistic people do enjoy tech and use their skills in that way, but I want to put it out there that we also need to expand this into other industries. And if you're interested in learning about some of the other industries where autistic people have succeeded, we do have a webinar on April 15th coming up. And if you are on the Frist Center email list, you will get more information and a link to that ahead of time. If you're not, feel free to send me an email at my first.last name at vanderbilt.edu. So claire.barnett@vanderbilt.edu, and I'll make sure you get the link, because we're going to talk about autistic people who are succeeding in medicine and academia, in law and art, and highlight how the unique way that their brains work actually do lend them to being successful in those fields. Okay, so we're going to transition now to our Q&A, because we could have a very long conversation about this, but I really want to hear more from Emily, from Bradley, from Tim, from Hiren, if there are questions for them. And I'm going to facilitate our Q&A here. So I would also like to point out that what happened at about 12:30 is that Vanderbilt students have a class that starts at 12:35. So when you watched several log off, it's because we had some Vandy students with us at noon who then were like, oh shoot, I have to go to my next virtual class. So half of our attendants did not all of a sudden decide that we're boring. They just had to attend another course. But the good news is they'll get the recording later to catch the end of this. So anyway, if you have a question, you are welcome to put it in the chat and I will read it out loud. Or if you want to unmute and say, hey, I want to ask out loud, go ahead and do that. It can be addressed to anyone here. I will say, so Bradley is obviously a self-advocate, and that's one of the things he represents here. Like I mentioned, I'm also on the spectrum, so I can also answer any questions you have for a self-advocate.
Claire, I wanted to respond to the two comments in the chat. So one, I thought Ben's point was excellent about, and I thought you gave a really good response with the range of industries. And we also, you and I both have a number of friends who are in journalism too, who are on the spectrum, right? Like, so there are all kinds of array of the industries. And I think the point is well taken that we should not say this is, okay, everybody shoehorned into tech employment, right? We are counting on you, Claire, on rethinking the entire approach to human capital management in organizations and human resource management. You're going to make it happen. And the other one about what comment, I think it was Nina's comment about the human user manual, about it not only helps neurodivergent people, but shows everybody has their strengths and difficulties. It's exactly right. I have used that tool in my core MBA course called Leading Teams and Organizations for Everyone. And what they found is it's very liberating because you get to put everything up front in a structured way. We just make what's typically undiscussable discussable. And we learn that our differences are actually opportunities for learning, right? Like the different kind of ways we work and oh, I'm going to get insights from this person because they like to work in this kind of way and they have these experiences and skills, right? Like, and it just gives people a structure for having those conversations. So I'm just amplifying your point to say, I agree. And I have some evidence that it actually does work in a broader way.
Yeah, and Tim, it's here, and I'll add some pieces onto that. And then I just also saw a question from Dan that came in. Neurodivergent team members at all ranks, at all levels, in all industries, being from the extremely creative, which I confess I'm not as much, to the extremely technical, but everything in between. There is no there is no box or ceiling that we should be putting on how we think about this. And we've been lucky at EY to be able to think about adding unique value, whether it be to marketing and creativity or to a risk management function at an organization. Clearly, our expertise is around corporate and the implementation there, but there is no boundaries, and I agree. There should not be, any perception that we're pigeonholing, and that's something that I will make sure on the platforms I have not to do. But Dan also put a question in here: is how has the pandemic affected employment? I'll tell you what we've seen. We've seen, unfortunately, those organizations that are thinking very narrowly about where and how you apply neurodivergent talent. We've seen them stop their hiring programs or even go in reverse. And I think that the movement around neurodiversity that we are that we keep growing globally. Emily and I just did some work across the UK and Ireland in educating folks. We need to do this from an ally and a neurodivergent perspective, because I think it is a lack of awareness and education that sometimes drives this perception to say, oh, it'll never work. I'd love to do a neurodiversity program, but I can't do it right now. So I think that to whatever extent Emily and myself and great voices like Bradley on our team can help with, I think we want to help to make sure that as the pandemic has unfortunately impacted so many individuals from an employment perspective, that the neurodivergent community doesn't get pushed further back into the queue. That is not something that's going to be acceptable. And
Well,
from an EYC.
I think what you point out there is companies have to understand that it's not a charity initiative that they put to the side because they don't have the extra funds. It is something that's essential for the success of their business. And that completely changes how you prioritize, like, oh, this is something that we're going to cut versus this is something we're going to bring right up to the top of the list. Okay. Yeah, well, and Dan, I shared an article in the group that if people have not seen, I think they would find interesting. It was an op-ed by a leader at Auticon, which employs entirely autistic consultants, I think mostly in the tech and data analysis field, saying that they felt like they were thriving in the pandemic specifically because 2/3 of their workforce, so all of their consultants, were autistic. That was something that, you know, they had found that these employees were incredibly focused, wanted to do their job no matter what, you know, and unlike some other employees, felt like the pandemic wasn't an excuse to slack. They felt like it was a reason to work even harder to prove that they were capable. And I hate that, you know, we have to prove anything, but that point aside, this article is for anyone else wondering about autistic people in the pandemic, this article is pointing to the fact that, you know, perhaps investing in autistic talent was a really smart move. So I also saw a question here. Well, actually, before I go on from that one, Emily or Bradley, would either of you like to speak to what it's been like during coronavirus to actually kind of be in this neurodiversity center at work?
Bradley, why don't you go first?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit on it. I think it's important to recognize with neurodiversity that there is a lot of there's a lot of diversity within neurodivergent individuals themselves. So it might not be the same for everybody, but since the pandemic has broken out, EY of course moved to being a work from home organization while we ride out the pandemic, and that has come with some things that are challenges, some things that are benefits. So there's less people in general walking around. In the office, there would be people walking around. In my house, there aren't. But now I also have a cat that can cause my ADHD to run off track more often and things like that. So it's had some challenges and some benefits to it.
That's great, Bradley. And I would just echo what Bradley has said. Just like I treat every one of my team members, they all have unique needs that, you know, just like I might have in the workplace, everyone is different. And so the work from home transition in the pandemic has brought on even more of an individualistic leadership approach that I've tried to tackle. I'm actually in the office today. We have returned at a very slow rate. And one example of what I have tried to advocate for my team members is some of them were ready to come back. And so we've developed a schedule where we're on a hybrid system right now. Some are coming in every Tuesday because they've needed that for their own personal well-being. And some of them, like Bradley, you'll notice he is at home and he's wanted to still be in that space. And that is important to him because of the situation of the pandemic itself. And so it's really brought out, I think, an even more strong need to advocate for what you need in the workplace. And I've seen that throughout my team members.
Lovely. Thank you so much, guys, for contributing to that. Tim, I noticed you unmuted. Do you have something to add to this?
I just wanted to add a general point to kind of telescope out a little bit from what Bradley and Emily mentioned, which were great points. Is that the hope is, I think, there are a few silver linings of COVID, but one hope is that people are comfortable, employers are comfortable with more ways of working and more different ways, and not presuming that it's some kind of extra special treatment that somebody gives. And instead, it's people need different kinds of ways and different kinds of modalities, which is in fact something that disabled folks have been advocating for a very long time. And and for employers to see, wow, the organization can still function amidst really difficult circumstances, terrible conditions out in the world, will hopefully persist in that people will have more flexibility. I would hope that this kind of trial by fire would lead to a more sustained commitment to flexibility and kind of individualizing the workplace that I think is what's essential for making diversity more sustainable.
Well, and I suppose before we shift gears, because our second question I think will be briefer to address, although if anyone has another, put it in the chat. I was going to say, working from home during the pandemic allowed me to train my service animal to do medicine reminders. So I just pulled Maeve up here. Say hi. Yeah, okay. Maeve's a miniature Aussie Doodle, and I had heard briefly before the pandemic started that you could train a service dog to do medication reminders. And I did all this research and found that you absolutely could. Yes, you can go back to taking a nap. Sorry. And I did not have the ability to train an animal while working out of an office 9 to 5. So that was something that I considered asking for as an accommodation, was like, would I be able to work from home to try this? But had not built up the guts to ask. Even though I work at a place that's so autism friendly, it's just hard to ask for things to be different. And then when this happened, it was like, oh, well, it's just meant to be. And so I got this animal and took, 4 months of working from home, but also training her throughout the day. And have ended up with a service dog that is immensely helpful and make sure I take every dose of medicine on time. So that has been a pro that I didn't even imagine, but you think about how it's the kind of thing that even in a place that's so friendly to being on the spectrum, to accommodation, I mean, it's just tough to say I need something a little bit different. So anyway, let's shift gears real quickly to Philip's thought, which is about autistic people in the Olympics. And I sent an article about autistic people that are embracing and excelling at sports. The article I sent, to be fair, is mildly ableist in its suggestion that by exceeding at sports, autistic people are defying expectations. I don't know why you would expect us to be any worse at sports than other people, so ignore that part. But it does cover all of these autistic athletes who are succeeding, and by doing so, creating either hobbies or careers in athletics. And so does anyone have any experience on this panel seeing autistic people benefit from being active in athletics, or even people you know of who have pursued professional sports? I know that there are several Special Olympics medalists who are on the spectrum. And so that is a place where autistic athletes have had this space created to succeed. But I don't know of any Olympic medalists who are autistic. So that might be something that I'm just unaware of, or it might be something where we should be pushing to say, make sure these folks have the same opportunity to participate. I don't see anyone else popping in to address this question, although if you have a thought, please put it in the chat. And if anyone else has a question, we have time for at least one more before we close out. Although not seeing one, I would say I would love to ask specifically Tim and Hiren, because you guys are in a way leaders in this field sort of professionally. What do you see as the future of autism at work? Will it continue to be these special programs that really do provide unique supports? Will it become a part of every company that we just support every employee, whether they're autistic or not? I mean, what are we looking at? I mean, decades down the road, let's say 50 years in this realm. And I would even love to know from Bradley, like, what are you hoping for? Mm-hmm. Because you, like me, are on the younger side of being in the workforce. I mean, if you're retiring one day, what do you hope has changed between now and then? So we'll start with Tim or Hiren, whoever would like to go first.
Yeah, Claire, I'll go because it's easy for us. Our very specific goal at EY, in the next 10 years, we do not have a neurodiversity program because we do not need one. And frankly, our goal is to use our voice to positively, in fact, I please excuse the use of that term right now, but to really positively inspire, motivate, and move other organizations to recognize neurodiversity as a key component of their talent needs and frankly, adjust all of their processes in their organization to naturally attract, retain, and support talent.
Amazing. I love it. Okay, Tim, what do you think?
Yeah, truly inclusive organizations that give everyone a meaningful sense of belonging, right? Like that's it. And the thing that I'm going to continue pushing on, and I hope we'll have made some dent, is that it's not just about all the kind of employment opportunities, but if people want to be leading organizations. So I would like to see people who are openly autistic, neurodivergent, and all different kinds of ways in the workplace being CEOs of Fortune 500 companies and things like that, right? Like, so it's just kind of, there are no limits on what.
Tim, give me about a decade, because that's what I want to see happen too. I'm hoping, I didn't ask myself this question, but if you ask me what I want to see next for autistic people, it's I want to see them understand that not only do they belong, but they can be leaders. So, okay. And then Bradley, I think this is a perfect spot for you to finish us out on the Q&A. What are you hoping evolves, changes, becomes normal? What do you think will happen throughout the course of your career?
So EY's the first place that I've worked at that's specifically kind of created a group of neurodiverse individuals. And so I don't have a ton of experience in kind of companies doing that yet, but I would like to say that EY as a whole has felt very welcoming. It's felt like a place that I could actually make a career at. And so I would love for those opportunities to open up as well at other companies and continue to open up at EY, so that way more individuals could take advantage of them.
Absolutely. Well, and I trust that even if one day EY doesn't have a neurodiversity center, that they're always going to be the kind of place that models accommodation and inclusion and the unique supports that any individual needs. Because I know you guys well enough that I know you'll do that. I'm going to hand it over to Ellie to share a resource she created with you guys, and then we will close this webinar out. This hour has gone by so quickly, but Ellie, the floor is yours to close us out.
I just wanted to say thank you all for coming, especially Hiren, Emily, Bradley, Tim, and Claire. I think this conversation was very beneficial, and I hope that our audience learned something new, maybe many different things that were new, hopefully. I have the graphic. Do you want me to send a link in the chat?
I think that is a great idea. And what Ellie has created is sort of the Spark Notes version of this webinar. Which is exciting because you can send it out to people who you wish they were here and they weren't, or you can send it with the link to the recording.
Yes.
We will also post it on our website, so you can look there and on our Instagram in the next couple of days. And even if she's not able to get the link into the chat now, those will be the places you can find this graphic. And this is the culmination of Ellie's whole semester learning about neurodiversity. And she, organized, put on this event, created this resource for you guys as her sort of culminating project. So I am very grateful to you, Ellie, for all the learning you've done and helping to put this together.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm unable to download it right now for some reason, but I think maybe the website and sending out the link to the recording of the video will be a great way to attach this infographic as well. So thank you all.